The atmosphere outside the gates of the demonic academy was tense. Aspirants from across the cult gathered in droves, each one carrying their own hopes, ambitions, and fears. The path to becoming a leader within the demonic cult was not merely about bloodline, it demanded strength, cunning, and relentless will. For many, this day marked the beginning of that long and perilous journey. But for Prince Qian Yuan, the day had already presented a quiet challenge as he approached the entrance. He was stopped. The academy gatekeepers demanded an official proof of identity required to enter the grounds. Prince Qian searched calmly, but his tag was nowhere to be found. It had been deliberately taken from him, a calculated sabotage, likely orchestrated by those who wished to see him fail before he could even begin. He understood the intent clearly, but he did not let anger take hold. Instead, he stood in silence, composed, certain of his identity. The others questioned him, suspicious of his presence without documentation. But when they checked the records, the name Qian Yuan was undeniably present. No one could deny his bloodline. Despite the attempt to delay him, he was finally granted entry. The moment he stepped through the gates, a sound echoed across the academy. A powerful trumpet blast rang out, silencing the murmurs and movements of the crowd. Heads turned toward the large ceremonial platform at the center of the grounds. From behind a curtain of authority and presence, 4 powerful figures emerged, each one emanating a pressure that struck awe into the hearts of everyone present. Among them was Li Huameng, the Fire King, known for his immense strength and absolute control within the demonic academy. To his side stood Crazy Blade, Xiab Meng, a man with a sharp and dangerous aura. His reputation was known even beyond the cult's inner circle. Another was Merakum, the Guardian Chief, a figure cloaked in calmness, yet rumored to possess devastating power. And finally, at the center of them all, stood the supreme leader of the demonic cult, Lord Qianma himself, Qian Yuzhong. The air shifted as Qian Yuzhong stepped forward. He said only a few words, yet those words carried a weight beyond language. His voice, calm and composed, reached every corner of the academy grounds. Each syllable he spoke radiated overwhelming power. His presence alone made hearts tremble, minds sharpen, and bodies straightened. It was not a voice meant to be questioned. It was a force to be obeyed. For a brief moment, everyone from the most arrogant heirs to the quietest students felt the sheer immensity of the man before them. His words ignited a fire in their spirits, filled them with purpose, and reminded them of the power they sought to claim. Then, just as swiftly as he had arrived, Qian Yuzhong turned and departed, leaving the audience frozen in reverence. With the supreme leader gone, Li Huameng stepped forward to speak. He began explaining the structure of the academy. The demonic academy would span for years, divided into 6 progressive stages. Each stage would test the physical, mental, and spiritual limits of every student. And each student would be allowed only 1 attempt per stage. Failure at any point meant expulsion. There would be no second chances, but for those who succeeded, those who endured and completed all 6 stages, a reward awaited. Each victorious student would be granted a black dragon sphere, a mysterious artifact capable of increasing their lifespan by 120 years. Alongside it, they would receive a secret martial arts manual, an exclusive text holding advanced techniques and wisdom beyond the reach of ordinary disciples. The reward was immense, but so was the risk. The Fire King made it clear, the path would be more than difficult. It would be brutal, unforgiving, and deadly. Even if a person were brought back to life and tried again, they would still fail unless they were truly exceptional. The message was simple: only the strongest would survive. And from the back of the crowd, Prince Qian Yuan stood silently, his expression unreadable. The path before him was now clear, and the first step had already begun. The courtyard remained filled with the presence of hundreds of young warriors, each one standing in nervous silence after hearing the strict outline of the academy's rules. Standing at the front with unshaken authority was the Fire King, Li Hu Myung, his voice still echoing through the training grounds. His tone remained powerful, confident, and unwavering as he continued the orientation. He turned his gaze toward the 6 candidates, heirs of the 6 main clans, and gave them a warning: there would be no favoritism, although they were born from powerful lineages and carried the pride of their clans. None of that mattered inside the walls of the Demonic Academy. Every student would start at the same level, with no special privileges. Skill, effort, and strength alone would determine who would rise. Their blood meant nothing if their actions could not prove it. The Fire King's words struck deeply, especially to those who had grown used to special treatment. He made it clear this was a battlefield of merit. And then, with no hesitation, he delivered the next instruction. They were to form groups. It was the first part of the entrance examination, a trial of cooperation and instinct. The order to form teams sent confusion and resistance rippling through the gathered students. Voices rose in protest. Many complained, objecting to such an early test before even stepping into training halls. Some believed the test was unfair. Others simply did not understand the purpose behind it. The courtyard became noisy, filled with anxious murmuring. But the Fire King did not entertain arguments. He raised his voice, sharp and cutting like a blade. There was no room for negotiation. The command stood firm. Anyone who could not pass the first test would be immediately expelled. No warnings, no sympathy. Then came the explanation of the first challenge. They would be tested on their basic abilities, more specifically, their foundational Nigong, or internal energy control. The ability to manipulate this internal force was fundamental to all martial techniques. However, within the context of the demonic cult, Nigong had a darker reputation. It was often associated with cunning and deceptive methods, hidden techniques, meant to cripple, distract, or manipulate. Some of the students smiled confidently. They believed they held an advantage. Those who had trained in Nigong from an early age thought they would easily pass. But their confidence would be short-lived. A new presence stepped forward, a woman, elegant, yet cold, dressed in the robes of the Sound Clan. Her name was Hang. So you, one of the elders. Without a word, she lifted her instrument, a strange and delicate-looking musical tool, and positioned herself before the crowd. Then, she began to play. At first, the sound was gentle, flowing like water. But within seconds, it changed. The melody twisted into something unnatural, sharp, invasive, and piercing. The air itself seemed to vibrate, and an invisible pressure began to push down on everyone present. What followed was chaos. The sound attacked the minds of the students. Their thoughts scattered. Their focus shattered. One by one, they collapsed. Some fell to their knees, others to the ground, clutching their ears. A few vomited. Several screamed in pain. The psychological assault was unbearable. The music twisted through their consciousness like knives. It was not mere sound, it was a weapon. Even the 6 main candidates, the pride of their clans, were caught in the storm. Each of them tried to resist, but their bodies trembled and gave way. Their knees hit the ground. Sweat poured from their faces. Blood began to leak from the ears of those closest to Hang So-yu. But amidst the broken crowd, one figure stood tall. Prince Qian Yuan. He remained still, his expression confused rather than pained. Around him bodies dropped and writhed, but he did not flinch. He looked around slowly, unsure why everyone was reacting with such intense suffering. Inside his mind, the Nano had acted on instinct, detecting a dangerous sonic frequency. It had immediately deactivated Prince Qian's sense of hearing to prevent damage. The auditory nerves were temporarily shut down, shielding him completely from Hang So. Why use psychological assault as the elder played more intensely? Frustration began to show. She increased the intensity, pouring greater force into her performance. The vibrations became violent, nearly ripping through the lungs and minds of the students. More blood spilled, more bodies dropped. Yet Prince Qian remained unaffected. He stood alone in the chaos, seemingly untouched by the attack, from their positions on the ground. The 6 candidates raised their heads, eyes wide with disbelief. Their bodies shook from pain, but their gaze turned toward the one anomaly amidst the destruction, and what they saw stunned them beyond words. Behind them, where no one expected strength or resistance, stood the one they had dismissed. The failed child, the forgotten seventh son. Prince Qian Yuan had not fallen. The battlefield of sound had not yet ended. In the midst of dozens of fallen students, Prince Qian Yuan remained the only one standing, still upright with calm in his expression. His posture did not carry arrogance, only quiet confusion. Around him, groans echoed through the air, as others clutched their heads and ears in agony. Yet Prince Qian stood unaffected. His senses shielded by the automatic defense of the Enomakin. It had completely disabled his hearing, without sound reaching his mind. The devastating melody of Hang Soyu's instrument failed to touch him. He could see the chaos, the suffering, and the pain, but he could not hear it. And that difference, though invisible to the others, made him the only one untouched. Hang Soyu watched from the front. Her eyes filled with disbelief. She had increased the intensity of her music beyond what most humans could endure. Her performance was not only a show of power, it was a test of psychological endurance, a weapon meant to expose weakness. And yet, that one boy still stood, untouched, unmoved, and unbroken. The emotion swelled within her disbelief, turning to irritation, and irritation to fury. Hang So, you began to push the tempo of her melody into its most aggressive form. She poured her anger into the strings, determined to break the last figure standing. Her instrument shrieked with malicious force, causing many of the still conscious students to bleed from their ears. Even some of the elite candidates writhed in agony. But Prince Qian Yuan remained. He saw the intensity in her expression and realized the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. If he continued to stand while everyone else fell, it would only draw more suspicion. His very survival would look unnatural. He understood it was necessary to appear vulnerable, even wounded. For the sake of blending in, he sent a command. To the Nano Machine Prince, Qian asked it to inflict internal damage to his body. Enough to convince others he had not escaped the test unscathed. The Nano Machine calculated his request and initiated the internal injuries. The result was nearly fatal. Though he had asked for moderate damage, the restructuring of his body meant his pain threshold was still adjusting. A 30% internal damage level hit him like a thunderbolt. His legs buckled. Blood surged from his throat. He coughed violently, collapsing to his knees as crimson liquid spilled from his mouth and nose. From the stage, Li Huamyung, the Fire King, stepped forward immediately. He had watched the ordeal with growing concern. Though Prince Qian was from a lesser clan and carried little status, he was still a son of the Lord Qianma himself. His death during the entrance test would become a political disaster, one that even he could not explain away. As Hang So prepared to unleash her final wave of sound, the Fire King raised his hand and stopped her. His voice, firm and commanding, told her to end it. If she continued, there would be no survivors left. The point had been made. Reluctantly, Hang So ceased her performance. As silence returned to the academy grounds, Li Huamyung hurried to Prince Qian's side. He watched the boy writhe in pain, his body trembling, blood still dripping from his mouth. And yet, despite everything, the boy had endured longer than anyone else. It was almost unbelievable. Curious, the Fire King reached out and placed a hand on the boy's chest, sensing for internal energy. Nigong, what he discovered left him speechless. There was nothing. Prince Qian Yuan had no Nigong, not even a trace. He had stood through the most devastating psychological assault without the aid of any internal energy technique. His survival had been built on sheer willpower and reckless determination. The Fire King immediately gave the order for Prince Qian to be taken for emergency medical treatment. His body was far too damaged to recover on its own, and the situation had already gone far enough. Hang So, still visibly upset, stepped away with frustration. She had never imagined a child without Nigong could resist her performance for so long. Her pride had been tested in the shadows nearby. Another figure observed with interest. Siab Meng, known as Crazy Blade, looked toward Prince Qian's weakened form with a gleam of curiosity. A rare smile touched his lips. He began to step forward, intending to approach the boy. But before he could take another step, Li Huamyung moved to block his path. Tensions sparked between them instantly. The Fire King stared firmly at Siab Meng, making it clear that now was not the time for tests or confrontations. Siab Meng hesitated, but after a brief pause, he backed down, not out of respect for Prince Qian, but to avoid a direct conflict. With Li Huamyong, though, he turned away. Siab Meng did not forget the boy. The failed son of the Qian family had endured a trial that no one else had. And now, a silent interest had begun to grow. On the second floor of the Demonic Academy's medical wing, a quiet and peaceful atmosphere lingered, a rare kind of silence for such a brutal institution. Inside one of the treatment rooms, a man named Baek Jong, Myung, sat waiting. As one of the Academy's few medical professionals, his days were often filled with preparation, not action. It was rare for anyone to visit him. Injuries were usually handled by martial arts instructors, or endured through sheer will. When a knock came at the door, and a student was brought in, Baek Jong Meng's eyes lit up with surprise and curiosity. He never expected to receive an actual patient so early in the semester. But that surprise turned to horror the moment he laid eyes on the boy. Prince Qian Yuan was covered in blood, his breathing shallow and his face pale. A red stain had dried across his chin and robe from the blood he had vomited earlier. To Baek Jong, Myung, it looked like the boy had been pushed far beyond his physical limits. He began asking questions to the academy staff member who had escorted Qian. The answers made little sense. No one could explain why such a young child was brought in with wounds so severe. Baek Jong Myung was unsettled, uncertain what kind of training methods had caused this level of trauma so soon. As he was still trying to understand the situation, a loud crash shattered the tension. The window exploded inward in a rain of glass and wind. A figure leapt into the room with wild momentum. It was Seo B. Meng, the infamous Crazy Blade. His sudden entrance startled everyone. But to Baek Jong Myung, it was an all-too-familiar disruption. The two men had a long and bitter history. Baek Jong Myung had once been a student under Siab Meng, though their relationship was anything but harmonious. Arguments and conflict had defined their connection more than mentorship now. Standing over the unconscious boy, Siab Meng scowled. He didn't believe for a second that the child was still unconscious. In his eyes, the injuries were too clean, too theatrical. He muttered that the boy was pretending to sleep, faking his condition. Without hesitation, Siab Meng raised his hand threateningly, declaring that if Xian didn't wake up soon, he'd strike him to force a reaction. And just like that, Prince Qian Yuan opened his eyes. His body still ached from the internal damage caused by the nanomachine. He was trying to hold his composure, even as he struggled to breathe normally. His thoughts raced, wondering whether Siab Meng had figured out that his injuries had been self-inflicted. If this man saw through the illusion, everything might fall apart. But as Prince Qian watched Siab Meng's face, something became clear. The man didn't know the truth. Siab Meng wasn't interested in the nature of the wounds, only in the boy himself. His interest came from instinct, not evidence. He was simply fascinated by Prince Qian's behavior and resilience. Without warning, Siab Meng made an announcement that stunned everyone in the room. He would take Prince Qian Yuan as his personal disciple. The words fell like thunder. Even Baek Jong Myung froze at the absurdity of the declaration. The room, once quiet, was filled with disbelief. Prince Cheon himself was more confused than anyone. He tried to make sense of it, questioning whether this was a trap, a test, or some elaborate setup. He knew his identity, as the seventh prince was seen as a stain among the great clans. His status was weak, his reputation worse. For Siab Meng to take him in as a student was bound to bring consequences. Political backlash, scrutiny, and possibly even punishment. Yet Siab Meng didn't care. As Prince Qian hesitated, Siab Meng reached into his robe and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. He tossed it toward the boy, a paper marked with strange symbols and official insignia. It was a key, a pass. Siab Meng told him what it meant. The second test at the Demonic Academy would not be something that could be overcome without the use of Nagong. Without internal energy, survival was impossible. The note he offered was more than symbolic. It was a lifeline, a direct bridge to the next stage, now. Prince Qian understood. This was no trap. It was an opportunity. An opportunity wrapped in danger, with unclear consequences. But in a world where strength was the only truth, even uncertain chances had to be taken. Inside the quiet room on the second floor of the Demonic Academy, Prince Qian Yuan lay in bed, slowly regaining strength. Across from him stood Xiao Meng, whose curious gaze had not left the boy since the moment they met. Despite the relatively peaceful setting, Qian remained wary. His mind stayed alert, especially as he feared that anything he said might accidentally expose the existence of the nanomachine. His greatest secret, Xiao Meng seemed relaxed, but there was calculation behind his every word. He casually began to speak, explaining why. Out of all the students who had collapsed during the first test, Qian was the only one brought to the medical floor. At first, this seemed unfair. Many others had suffered under the sonic assault of Hang So Yu. Yet none were given medical treatment. Qian's irritation began to grow. But then, Xiao Meng clarified the reason was simple. All the other students, even those weakened by the test, possessed Nigong. They had the ability to sit in meditation and restore their inner balance. Their training allowed them to recover without assistance. But Qian had none of that. His body, damaged by artificial means, lacked any self-healing capacity. That was why he alone had to be carried away. It was a painful truth. Qian clenched his fist at the realization. What others had naturally, he still lacked. His power came from elsewhere, and yet he couldn't deny that truth had given him perspective and motivation. Suddenly, he remembered something. The Fire King Li Huimyung had previously declared that anyone who completed all 6 stages of the Academy's training would be rewarded with a black dragon sphere, a miraculous item that could extend life and grant massive power. When Qian brought this up, Xiao Meng laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh, but one laced with amusement and familiarity. He told Qian that the Fire King had conveniently left out a crucial detail, something most students wouldn't learn until it was too late to actually earn the Black Dragon Sphere. A student had to conquer all 6 floors of the Academy. Each floor contained a hidden trial, strict access rules, and restricted learning. Even once inside, they would only be granted 2 hours, not a second more, to study the manuals kept within. No one was allowed to freely browse or take the books. Too. Most that wasn't nearly enough time. Even Xiao Meng admitted that in 2 hours. He himself could only study 2 manuals thoroughly. Qian, however, processed the information differently. For him, 2 hours might be enough to absorb hundreds. With the help of the nanomachines, instant learning, and memory synchronization, even a brief exposure to martial arts manuals could be more than enough to gain mastery. His attention shifted to the piece of parchment beside him. He recognized it now. The breathing technique, the same one Xiao Meng had offered earlier. His instincts were correct, and Xiao Meng confirmed it. With a simple nod. It was, in fact, a fundamental Nigong breathing technique. The key to unlocking internal energy flow, and quiet determination began to rise inside Qian. He knew what he had to do. Gathering strength, he pulled himself up from the bed. Then, in a formal and humble gesture, he lowered his head to the floor once, and then again. The gesture of a disciple, requesting to be accepted by a master. It was clear, and without hesitation, Xiao Meng's eyes gleamed with joy. There was something about this boy, this so-called failed prince, that deeply fascinated him. And now, the boy was willingly offering himself as a student. Xiao Meng accepted, and with a rare satisfied smile, he turned to his former disciple, Baek Jung-myung, and assigned him the responsibility of guiding Qian through the healing process. Elsewhere, outside the medical quarters, the central training ground of the Demonic Academy began to settle into calm. Students, many still shaken by the previous trial, now sat in meditation. The sound-based psychological assault from earlier had left them, rattled, but not broken. Using their cultivated Nigong, they began the slow process of recovery, channeling energy into their meridians to heal internal wounds. Not all had succeeded. Several students had already been disqualified, unable to withstand the pressure of the test. Their complaints echoed through the halls, cries of unfairness, of being thrown into a serious trial without warning. One even attempted to rebel against the instructors, but was quickly subdued and removed from the academy without hesitation. The environment had become harsh, and no one could afford weakness. Despite the intensity, the 6 great clan heirs had endured without major difficulty. Their discipline, years of training, and powerful bloodlines had made them formidable. Among them, Qian Muyan, of the Dark Clan, and Qian Yuchan, of the Blade Clan, stood out. Both had passed the sonic trial, without even flinching, sitting motionless through the entire assault, earning respect and fear from their peers. Li Huamyung watched all of this unfold with interest. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of excitement. The incoming generation showed promise, and a few unexpected elements, like the strange resilience of Prince Qian Yuan, made things even more unpredictable. The academy had only just begun, but the path forward was already blazing with heat.